Good morning, afternoon, or good evening, folks. I'm your host and guide, Chris Roberts. I'm going to take you on a tour of the underground to help you prepare for what's really out there. Whether you're on the front lines battling the latest threats or leading the overall defensive strategy within your organization, my focus is to help you uncover the best ways, means, and methods to effectively and efficiently use actual threat intelligence within your company, providing you with more insights and practical ways to identify threats and reduce risks before they become incidents. Ready to dive in? Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. Welcome to another conversation around the Dr. Dog web series. I am once again joined by Danny, who is going to make sure that we all run smoothly and civilized and everything else. And I'm honored and privileged to be joined by a very, very good friend, Joseph Carson, from quite halfway across the world. We're about a third of the way across the world, aren't I, at the moment? So, yeah, I'm going to shut up and let you introduce yourself, if you don't mind, for a second.
Absolutely. Chris and Danny, it's a pleasure to be here. And, many thanks for inviting me on as a guest and to provide my expertise. It's such an honor to be participating in this. So my name is Joseph Carson. I'm the Chief Security Scientist Advisory CISO at a company called Delinea, formerly known as Thycotic and Centrify. So it's the merger of those two companies together. And I'm joining you from across the world, absolutely, as Chris mentioned. I'm based in Tallinn, Estonia, which is a country that's well known for its digital innovations. It's a great place to be located. And of course, here, I'm always saying that, I'm the survivor of a cyber war, which was famously back in 2007, where we did have quite a bit of an incident when it came to, a bit of, let's say, upset in the former family, which is our noisy neighbor with Russia. And for that, it's really put a kind of, a caution and everything from that lessons. And we learn a lot from the types of attacks that happen. And it's become a lot of what we see in the traditional playbooks today. Actually, we look back and it's no different from what we're seeing in recent incidents. So for me, it's great to be located here. It does make us vigorous and very cautious, and we don't trust anything. So which does help a lot in our industry for sure. But really excited to talk about today's topic.
I think it's interesting. I mean, the Estonia thing is always interesting. I mean, I see a bunch of polls on LinkedIn and other social media platforms where they talk about, well, who's the most advanced cyber-based organizations, and it's the normal protagonists. It's the China, the US, the Israelis, and a couple of others. And every now and again, I'll throw New Zealand in just for the hell of it, just because somebody somewhere's got to blame New Zealand for something. But more often than not, I'll chuck Estonia in, and people are like, "Wow!" I'm like, "Y'all need to do some homework on this one." Yeah. And it's amazing, and I think it runs into some of the stuff we're talking about. I mean, you mentioned the adversarial work by the neighborhood in 2007. And I think, at that point in time, when we look at information and intelligence, we didn't have anywhere near the capabilities we had today. We didn't have access to anything. And the commercial world really didn't have a clue what the hell was going on. And you fast forward, 14, 15 years, and it's an entirely different landscape out there.
Absolutely. I mean, my background in all of this, I spent close to 12, 13 years at Symantec. And one of the things that Symantec had done, especially with their AV, and AV was probably one of the kind of first intelligence feeds, really, when you think about from a software bulletin, our bulletin.
The bulletin stuff, definitely.
So, where basically someone's finding threats over here, and they will basically put that into bulletins and then deploy it to other AVs in order so other people get protected. And part of that, we also create what was called as the GIN network, which is a global intelligence network, which is, again, sharing all of those different types of threats across the world. So you actually get to see visibility. And then that created into another, one thing was interesting during, and this is going back 10 plus years ago, was also, when you do some type of analysis, in a lot of cases, you also find companies who don't, they're mostly focused at defense, but they don't realize that actually some of their systems are compromised and attacking other systems. This is always an interesting finding as well. So my background, but 10 plus years ago, we had nothing to the available data and intelligence is available to organizations today to really, to turn. One of the big things we have is really turning security into business value. And I think threat intelligence is a mechanism to really allow us to do that convergence, to really make sense of attacks and turn it into much more business justification and business value. So at least the organization can see that the tools are actually making, business decisions to help reduce the risk.
I think it's, I mean, because to your point, I mean, you go back to the AV days, and it was, hey, I have this platform, it's in front of me, it's doing what it can to help reduce my risk and protect me to some degree. And the only way it knows to do better is if it's pulling in a bunch of information from out there, making decisions on what's good, what's bad, what's ugly, and what's indifferent, and then as best as it can back then updating signatures, early heuristics, and other things. And I mean, now you fast forward, what I like about some of the stuff we're seeing is I'd say we're getting proactive, but we're definitely getting to a point where we're more than just reacting all the darn time. You have got some companies which are going, hey, Log4 and a bunch of the other stuff, Solar and other stuff that's happened. Hey, this is going on. Help me understand what the impact is to me. And you take the information, turn it into actionable intelligence, and go, here's what we should do because of it. I like seeing how it's moved that way. To your point, the business side of it, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the critical part. Is years ago, I mean, when I first started a lot in the intelligence side of things, was I ran a NOC, which was for money markets and foreign exchange. And it was about the ability to see what was happening on the network. And a lot of things is that we have to always be careful in how we make decisions. And what I always found was that the best thing, other than sitting looking at a screen and seeing tons of red flags and not knowing which red flags to look at, and that we sometimes can create too much noise for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I remember, it was important for me to understand about how can I turn it into actionable? How can I make it work for me and do automation? How can I get the benefit out of it? And what I found was that the most important thing for any organization who's going down that path, you really want to understand about what's the important questions that you want to get answered. And if you don't know what the questions are, then you're going to get intelligence feeds that you're not going to be able to turn into value. So it's always important to make sure that what is it you're trying to improve? What is your strategy? Is it an operational type of kind of improvement that you're trying to achieve? Is it something that's tactical that you're just trying to make sure that you can get much more, let's say, value out of the solutions, that you're trying to get more automation in place? Is it basically strategic for the business? So you want to kind of understand about what is it you're trying to achieve, who gets value out of it. But I will say that the most important thing is if you don't have a list of like 5 or 6, 10 questions that you want to get out of the data, then you're already you're going down that path of having a big red screen, and you won't know what to do with the data. So it's important to have the right questions first.
We see that too often, and I think that's probably what's given part of this industry a black eye. Is somebody's come basically rolling in with a great big fire hose and said, "Stand back! I've got stuff for you." And you just crack it open and you flood the place.
The waterfall opens up.
Yeah.
the dam breaks, and all of a sudden,
yeah. I mean,
if you're very dependent on people and resources to make sense of the data, you're going to overwhelm those resources significantly.
And then you turn it off, or
you turn it off, or all of a sudden you end up with that big red screen that no one pays attention to, and all of a sudden, when the real attacks are happening, that red screen is showing you that the attacks are happening, but you just can't make sense because you're looking for basically that needle in a haystack. So it's really important to make sure that I will say that the questions will help you make sure that one is that you get the right context of the data in order to actually make the most value, so that you can hide the noise until you need it. I mean, I've done a numerous incident response the past year on a lot of ransomware cases. And unfortunately, the challenge is that when you get into doing the digital forensics and you start uncovering the logs and you're looking through and you're like, oh my goodness, I mean, it was so obvious that something bad was about to happen. It was so obvious that in the logs, it was screaming for help. But the problem is that, one, there was no way of correlating that data to bring it in to make sense of it. And I think that's what organizations really need to prioritize, to make sure that you can make sense of the data.
Here's a question, because this is something, again, security's not been good at doing, and we're getting better at it. No two ways about it. And I think a lot of us, there's been a cry from both internally from us and also from probably the business as well to say, hey, we don't need you all to be MBAs. We don't need you to go to business school for anything, but for crying out loud, pick up a book and understand how to talk with us. When you're coming into those situations and you're going, hey, let me help you understand what you need, where you need to focus. Where are you concentrating in those conversations, or are you all over the business?
So, I mean, it depends. I mean, I kind of use each year, I try to focus my skill set in specific verticals to try and educate myself. Right now, the past year has been mostly focused around critical infrastructure and IoT. So that's a lot of my research. But what I tend to do is that it was a few years ago, which really kind of made me realize I've done over my career, I do a lot of executive briefings. So as
Yep.
part of my advisory CISO role, that I'm almost like a sounding board for, many CISOs out there. They will come to me, and I'll take my company hat off and I'll put my expertise and advisory hat on. So they
Yeah.
know they'll get unbiased. I'm not selling anything. I'm just providing them my honest education knowledge. And when they come to me, it's been really insightful, and it allows me to understand about a lot of the similar challenges that many of them have. And it wasn't until a few years ago I was doing different penetration tests. I did a lot of in this transportation industry, especially in shipping and maritime and ship management. And that was always
Yep.
it was a lot of fun. I crossed paths a lot of times with the likes of Ken Monroe and even
Yes.
the team over at IOActive, for impressive people there. So we
Yeah.
crossed paths a lot of time during that period. And it wasn't until I was asked, and I did a penetration test on a power station. And it was the CISO had asked, the main thing was they wanted to get some type of information so they could actually get new, improved budget to do some of the things that you're talking about, threat intelligence, getting feeds and
Yeah.
doing. But the problem was is that after the penetration test, that we collected such great data and understanding about the risks and the vulnerabilities that they had and the poor practices that were in place. But when we went to present that to the business, it was lost in translation, completely lost. We presented fear and FUD. And it wasn't until afterwards the CISO came in, and it was the CEO and CFO wanted to have the meeting. And they said, right, presented great. It was like, scary news feed that you got. And all of a sudden we just didn't know what to do with it. And
Yeah.
it got to the point where it was the CEO said that, it's important. One thing is you need to be able to convert everything you're doing into business language, into things that we understand and that we care about. And the CEO said, what we care about is how are you helping the business? It's not
Hmm.
about, otherwise you're just seen as a risk, a cost. You're not seen as any value to the business. You're just that team over there. And unfortunately, security gets labeled in with IT. They get
Yeah.
synonymous with that same team, but to be honest, they should be separated. You should have IT, which is focused on technology, but security is focused across the business line. So that's always sometimes just an organizational structure challenge. But ultimately, what happened was the CFO came up and said, I look at things as a return on investment. How are you helping employees do better at their job? How are you helping us provide better services to our clients? And he said, I'm like, yeah, but how do we do that? And he said, it's quite in this very deep, accent. It's quite easy. It says, cost of doing something versus the cost of doing nothing. And I always remember
Yeah.
that line. It just it was like a tattoo on my forehead, that line that made me realize that, yes, everything we do, it's all about risk.
Yeah.
And this ultimately that was the realization. I realized that was the moment in time where I actually realized that my job was no longer security. I realized at that point, the security mind of my mindset just changed, like minutes and seconds. I realized that I'm actually not here to push security into the business. I'm here to listen and
Yeah.
understand the risks that the business has, and then try to understand about. And we're doing this in the reverse. We're too much pushing security
Yes.
to the business, and I actually hate it.
Right.
We had Cybersecurity Awareness Month October every year we have it.
Yeah.
I was a bit we have the security first approach, but it's not security first. It's business first.
No.
It's people first. It's risk, and security is a supporting pillar in that. And this is where we forget. We think it's all about security. And that was a moment in time where I realized that my career changed. Literally, that moment in time when I came back and I sat in the office, I'm here going, that was just a wake up call that what we are here to do is listen to the business and understand about how we can use our security expertise and knowledge to make sure the business is resilient to all the different
Yeah.
threats out there.
Well, I mean,
What I
that's,
realized.
yeah. I think that's, again, one of the things we tend to relate it to, which sounds very similar to that, is it's the knowledge and the understanding of the risk. Unfortunately, too many organizations don't recognize they have a risk until something's happened.
Yes.
We always liken it to, to us bringing any kind of information and intelligence in, at least from the outside. If you look at external intelligence, situational intelligence, internal stuff, at least from the outside, it's akin to putting your head above the parapet and going, hey, yeah, is it just one person wandering up, or are we going to flip in? We've got a Hellcat heading our way.
Absolutely.
At least then I can help the organization understand what's going on, what's happening, and why we need to, work on this and how. And there's so many drivers for it, especially when you have the internal and the third parties.
Yeah, that's even, I think that's probably one of the major high risk areas for many organizations is supply chain, third parties, and consultants is
Yeah.
coming in that you have no visibility into what was on those devices, what they're bringing into your organization, unless you have a complete that's a complete safe zone where, I've done a lot of work in the past where, going into any organization, I had to empty my pockets, take off my belt, and not let them in the
Yes.
middle.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's sometimes when you're in those situations, that's when you start less relying on Google,
Yeah.
heavily rely
Yeah.
on what's
Big
in your
time.
head, and you're limited to a landline phone with the old rotary,
Yep.
which still exists in a lot of places. But to your point, absolutely, one of the things I've too many organizations sometimes they've got when you think about trying to look for threats, is that too many organizations sometimes what their cameras are all pointed to is the doors and windows of the buildings. They're not
Yes.
focused internally, and they're not focused at the street and the surrounding areas. And it's about
Yep.
getting a balance between all of that. It's about if you make sure that somebody's looking at what threats are out there, what is the common techniques that's used? What is the common, exploits that's being, actively in the industry? If you're able to understand those, what happens is you're able to make sure you augment your security controls to be able
Yeah.
to make sure that the most common techniques has been used. And I will say that organizations won't be able to prevent all threats. What you want to be able to do is if you're standing, it's like you're standing looking at a lake. What you want to do is you want to be able to see where the fish are, and you're going to look for ripples in the water. And the more that you can get the fish to make ripples, the more that you can be able to see where are the threats and where you should be focusing your area on. And it really gets into, in that metaphor that I'm using, is all about we need to force the attackers into taking more risk.
Yeah.
And that's what the threat intelligence should be helping is that how do we make sure that we force them to take more risks? And the more risks that they take, the more ripples they will create, the more noise in the network that is going to basically come to the surface. And you'll then be able to look at your vast networks and be able to say, here is basically where I need to focus some of my attention. Not all, because sometimes it's misdirection. Sometimes it's
Yes.
that maybe there's a bit too much ripples if it's
Yeah.
if it's splashing
Seen that a
around.
few times. Yeah.
It's a bit of misdirection. They're really attacking you on the back door or another location. So it's always important to make sure that you kind of balance a lot of that. But the goal here is the more we force those, that noise in the network, the more we're able to make sure we are able to proactively stop the attacks before it turns into major catastrophe. So for me, it's all about balancing where your cameras are pointed. If you've only got one camera pointed at your door, then it's very likely you've already got an attacker inside, or
Right.
that there's attacks already that you're not aware of. So it's about balancing all of those intelligence together.
I think it's the other thing that comes into that as well. You mentioned it earlier about users, people, our best asset, which is marvelous, but also, unfortunately, one of the more prolific vectors that's used to attack. And so when you start looking at intelligence and information, it's like, okay, how can I help educate the users? Not only just the users, but if we're inside an organization, especially the ones you're talking about, some of the locations where you're in and everything gets left behind, you don't want to be walking out and 5 minutes later talking about it on social media. You don't want to be doing your research on the open network. You don't want to be doing source code review on open repositories, especially using corporate email address or government addresses. So for me, it's also a lot of that. We've used it successfully in the past where we've walked into an org and said, hey, you're doing all this. To your point, you've got cameras pointing here and here. However, let's have a conversation about some education around the technology departments, the business functions, and everything else. And that's proven to be really, really useful because now you're coming in going, hey, here's what we've got. Here's how we operationalize the data. Here's how we use it for education and training and awareness, not just the traditional, hey, we need more gear, we need this, we need to focus different. It's actually really nice doing that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a critical part is that we have to remember security is no longer about just technology. One thing is that we talk a lot about zero trust, and I'm not a big fan of the name. I like, unfortunately, we have to use it.
You and I both.
I heard some great alternatives. It's about zero friction. It's about zero assumptions. But I understand that when we talk about zero trust, and the goal, and I heard one of the best terms being mentioned not so long ago by one of the security leaders at Yahoo. And the
Yeah.
way he portrayed it was, it's a mindset and how you wish to operate your business in a secure way. And it was kind of
Yes.
clear. And I was like, okay, when he mentioned that, and that was during the QA session of this talk. And so when he mentioned that, it was clear that how he kind of made the definition of zero trust was, it's all about technology, people, and processes. It's about how
Yeah.
you operate. It's the operational part of how you practice securing your business.
Yeah.
And so that's important. It's always about, if you might have the greatest solutions, but if you don't train your people on how to use it, you're not going to get the value out of it. So it's all about making sure that you have the balance in all of those things. And I remember many years ago, I was part of a team that did another organization did an audit on this large transportation company, and basically it was focused around regulation and compliance side of things. That was the trigger. And
Yeah.
what they realized was they had a lot of silo solutions that were all
Mm.
basically these single silo solutions, one for doing antivirus, one for doing patch management, one for doing basically software license and inventory. So they're all siloed, but they were not kind of working together. And I was part of the team coming in to look at how they can make sure they can break down those walls to make much more holistic interoperability and get more value out of them working together. So when I was working on it, we realized that actually there was a very small percentage of the organization where 80% of all the risks were. You had a very few people in the organization that actually all the risks, when you actually correlated all that data together, you overlaid it, you saw that
Yeah.
actually these 200 people in the organization are the ones that's actually triggering all the alarms. They're the ones that's going and browsing suspicious websites. They're not rebooting their machine after being patched. They're reusing passwords everywhere. So it ended up correlating that and understanding about where that risk lays. And that was that was actually, when we think about threat intelligence, that was really kind of making use of the data you had, asking the right
Yeah.
questions,
Big time.
ranking it, correlating it, and then getting an understanding about what it is you really have from there. And that ultimately resulted in one of the projects was a security awareness training. And we also
Yes. And that's not surprising on that one, given some of the results.
but there was a double-edged sword in that. When we started it, we realized as we were becoming, again, going back to the point, and that was a time before I got the realization that I'm there to listen to employees. At that point in
Yeah.
time, it was before my realization, and I was there, with a hammer,
Hmm.
waiting for someone to do something wrong, and you beat them, you
We all did.
beat them
We
with a
all did.
squirrel. And it made me realize that actually we were then becoming the enforcers, becoming the law enforcement of securing the business. And it's not a good way, because what you're doing is you're creating that friction between the employees and the team. And ultimately, at some point in time, they stop listening and they start ignoring you.
And they go around.
Uh,
I'm going to find. We've talked about it. I mean, they coined it the whole shadow IT. There
yep,
we go.
yep.
I can go out and basically do it on my own corporate credit card, and I can still get. I mean,
And as a service that you have no visibility, and I can do it on my
yeah,
own personal device
yeah,
that you'll have no
yeah.
visibility on.
And unfortunately, to your point, we've. It sucks because I know what I was like. I mean, I've blamed users, my grandmother, everybody on this planet, developers. I mean, let's face it, the favorite targets were developers, network teams, and ops. And now we're like, we can't do that. We have to work together. We have to all the only way we're going to make any flipping headway in this is if we all sit down and go, okay, how do we make this work effectively?
Absolutely. And that's kind of the interesting thing. So then, when we realized that actually this isn't working, this is a bad idea. We were like sending
Right.
these like hard legal policies, emails, to employees saying, let's do this. If you don't,
Yeah.
there'll be consequences. And we
Yeah.
realized after like a few weeks, so quickly, it wasn't working. We were getting a lot of bad feedback. We were becoming the bad team of the company. And what we realized then was that we need to take a different approach. And the ironic thing was, at the same time, we were having this crisis in the team, trying to figure out how do we do it. And we actually, there was a bunch of kids who were doing like a workshop at the company. It was like some like kids day at the office. And we thought, do you mind, mind if we get some attention? And it was back when I was doing a lot of stuff in Estonia, which was called Tagasi Kooli, which is back to school. And it was me going to schools, and I was, at the same time, I was forcing cybersecurity on the kids. It doesn't work. It made me realize that, sometimes we have to listen. And when I started listening, at that time, I thought, oh, this is interesting. Let's try this. So we went and we actually got to interview the kids into helping us. How can we communicate security to you? What would be the best form? And it was quite funny because ultimately they said, the feedback was, it was like, I always remember the two major, there was a lot of things that came out in that discussion, which was interesting, but
Yeah.
the feedback was that, oh, you're like, you're doing it in such a language that we have no idea, we don't understand because
Yeah.
we're speaking a different language. So we actually converted it into comics, graphics.
Yeah.
Because
Nice.
images then are able to give people a common language of
Yeah.
images. So we took, don't plug USBs, smart passwords and everything, and we put it basically in a comic in little storyboards. That was just 4
Yeah.
pictures to explain, here's the bad thing, here's the risks, and here's what you should do instead.
Yeah.
And it came from the kids, and we're thinking, okay, so how do we communicate it? Well, how do we get it out there? We don't want to send emails. And we realize that email is not the best mean for sharing awareness training.
Right.
And we end up realizing that actually the best place in organization, well, probably a bit different today. It's more challenging today because of people working remotely. But we placed it in 2 locations in the offices, on the back of the toilet doors and in the
Yep. And the canteen.
Yep, the 2 places where there's elevators and other things where people located. But the
Yeah.
back of the toilet door, it meant that we had 2 minutes uninterrupted time of every employee per day looking at this awareness.
Yeah.
But we also realized that we can't expect all of our employees to become security professionals. We have to realize that it's not their job. Their
Yeah.
job, they get measured in very different ways, and we have to understand about how they get measured. And going back to the power station, that was a realization that I realized that I needed to go out and listen. And it meant that having to understand about how people do their jobs, how they measured on success. And I had to look at how can I make sure that whatever I do from a security perspective, it's making their job better. It's making
Yeah.
them happier. It's helping them meet their goals. And that's a lot of times when I say about the whole business first perspective and people first, is that how can I make sure that I'm using security to make the business successful? Whatever I'm putting in place, whatever technology process and stuff, that it's balanced and that is better than the alternative. It's better than what they're doing today. It gives them a much better experience. And this is where we make sure, and this is, we need to start moving security into the background. And that's
Yeah.
our threat intelligence. Threat intelligence can help you do that. If you're able to put more into the background, so it becomes automated, it becomes basically just like electricity. When you hit that switch, the light comes on. I don't need to know
Yeah.
how everything else works. But of course, there's certain times when you need to create interaction with the user to get their input. But we need to be using threat intelligence that will make security more contextual based, more adaptive, more
Yeah.
dynamic. It will also future-proof security investments as well, because then you can actually, if you're able to add different types of data sources into it, it can actually augment and change to actually prevent the future types of threats we're seeing.
Well,
So this is really where organizations can really start looking at this, is that it becomes a business enabler. It
Yeah.
becomes something that employees like to use. Victoria Baines wrote a book recently, which is on the whole cybersecurity industry brand
Mhm.
image problem that we have.
Yeah.
And I listened to one of her talks last year, and she was absolutely right. We sell security on fear, and we have to
Mhm.
start changing it, that we sell it and we actually position it on value, that there is a return on investment. And this is something we talked about before, is that for me, the most valuable asset that any organization has is time. And one of the things that we should be using, this is where I've used threat intelligence kind of feeds in the past, is to automate. And the more I can automate, the more time I save.
Yep.
And this is ultimately what we need to do. People talk about artificial intelligence. It's really advanced automation. It's really all about
Yeah.
autonomous
Yeah.
decision making. It's about
Yeah.
taking things where we have machine learning and taking all that information and making sense of it, and then turning it into actionable data, something that basically will save me time and allow me to go do the things I enjoy doing, whether it being learning new skills, whether it being innovating in the company, whether it being helping automate more things. I learned years ago, one of my bosses said, "What the most important thing I can be doing is making my job redundant."
Big time.
and
Yeah.
and
With
then,
all of us, I
and
think.
then there's
Yeah.
a fear of that. There's a fear of I like doing what I do, but what I need to be doing is I need to automate as much as I possibly can, make it as much more efficient as possible, and it's using all that data that's out there to do that. If there's certain things that I only know, I will try to find how can I make sure that get that data available, put it into something that's actionable, so I can move on to doing the next thing.
Yeah.
So
I think with that, though, I mean, you add into that the conversation about the business. It's all very well getting the data in, But to your point right at the beginning, you've got to know yourself well enough to know what the heck to ask of the data. And this is, I think, another one of those issues that we see inside the business so often. Yeah, part of the reason we're doing the podcasts is it's like, okay, let's bring amazing conversationalists like you in to go, hey, listen to the logic flow, listen to what they're asking before you commit to getting anything from anybody. I actually really don't care who you buy it from, but I want you to understand what the hell you're buying. I want you to come in when they bring that fire hose in. You better make sure that it's actionable. You better make sure that you're feeding it into something where you can actually use it efficiently and effectively, and not drown in the damn stuff. And I mean, that's key. And to your point, we haven't done the best job of it to this point.
Absolutely. I think you hit a point, but it kind of reminds me of seeing a lot of recent experiences with a lot of people who has went and they saw these amazing brochures. It's like when any type of advertising, you see these amazing brochures. And I think some people, has been interesting ones that's been, people have been sharing on different social media where they purchase cars from China. And all of a sudden, and it arrives in this massive box, months behind schedule, twice the price because of important customs. And all of a sudden, I put it up and it's made of paper mache or something. And you look at it and it's like, yeah, this is when you saw the brochure, but you didn't do enough research. You didn't do enough due diligence. Maybe take a trip there, take a look at the real thing, and understand exactly what is it you're getting. And what value? What is it you want to also use? And will it be something that will last the expectation lifetime? Will you be able to get it even interoperational? I've seen over my many years in the industry, I've seen a lot of shelfware organizations that purchased something and maybe never got it deployed at all. I remember going back. I mentioned earlier about doing the money markets and foreign exchange stock, and then I remember projects which was things like deploying Unicenter and Remedy. Which were 2-3
That's bringing back some scary memories.
And that was, I mean, you would invest an arm and a leg up front on hardware, resiliency. It's not just you had to buy one, you had to buy two. You had to buy two of everything. And you had to place them in different, data center locations. So you had to have all the kind of high availability. And to deploy, configure, it took years.
Yeah.
And in this industry, we don't have that time anymore. We have to get things which basically you can turn it on immediately. It's I guess the difference that we have today, and we've got a bit of a luxury into a lot of the the cloud services and microsegmentation and things. You can just say I want that, and you turn the tap, and all of a sudden it comes out. It's ready for you.
Yeah.
Where when I started off doing a lot of this early kind of work, was that was available. You had to build the pipes into your house.
Yeah,
you had to get, and it might have been, miles of pipes away. You might then turn on that water, might realize that, okay, my pipes were too small and I need to go and increase the size and re-dig up again. So a lot of the foundation work is already done. And it's important organizations realize that you need to ask the right questions. You need to understand about what the expectation is. You need to do your due diligence, practice, pilot it, trial it, and make sure that it's actually getting the value immediately. Because going to my point about you can't wait 2 to 3 years to get value out of a security investment today, that value must be immediate, because already in six months' time, a new vulnerability, a new technique will be available that will basically be all the adversaries out there and cyber criminals will monetize it. And you'll be looking at now, how can you augment your security to deal with that? And it shouldn't be, your decision should not be, I need to buy another tool. Because ultimately, I really liked, myself and Rick Ferguson did a session on CISOs about 6 months ago. And one of the great things that Rick was talking about and presenting was around, and especially in the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of organizations buy tools. And when you mean you're buying a hammer to do one thing, but you can't use that hammer, to basically cut wood. It would not be the great tool to saw something. And a lot of organizations have incurred technical debt. And that technical debt is very costly, because that means that you're in a situation where you've got a tool in place, you've got maintenance costs, you've got license costs. A lot of things are turned into subscription model that you now basically have to decide whether that you need to move to more strategic type of thinking. And that's where threat intelligence can help you. Threat intelligence can really help you make much more strategic decisions long-term, so that you actually make sure that you're continuously improving and not just buying silo products, tools that will do one thing. Everything needs, in the industry, we all need to work together. We all have the same, intentions and same motives. We're all here to make the world a safer place online for everybody. and we need to make sure that we work together. And that's one thing the adversaries are doing well, is that they're communicating, collaborating, working together, sharing. And that's where threat intelligence is that area of how we collaborate, how we share data. How can I make the person next to me also benefit from the information I have? Like-minded, even competitive companies. You don't want to be in the situation where your competitor gets taken down, because ultimately it might be you next. It's really important we make sure that this is how we basically work together. This is how, and it's all about, I say that we're all part of an orchestra. We all need to have a conductor who's helping us make sure that we're all, in the same rhythm, the same, hymn sheet and everything else. We all need to be making sure that we're working together and we're defending together. I learned it. One thing I talk about a lot is that, and like yourself, we do as much as we can to secure ourselves.
Yeah.
We sleep. It's always on our mind, and
Yep.
I do everything I possibly can. Literally, my security practices are just ridiculous. However, I know to make my area of risk is the social sphere around me.
Yeah.
It's the people around me, and that means that in order to make us, safer, it's just like we have in the pandemic. In order to make
Yep.
we need to make the community around us safer as well. We
Yep.
need to make sure
Absolutely.
that everyone has the same capabilities. Everyone has the same defenses and same awareness. And go back. An interesting thing was when I talked about the security awareness and the transportation company
Yeah.
that resulted in the kids, and we put the pictures of the bathroom doors and stuff like that. So, an
Yep.
interesting thing that happened then, and I think this is really important for organizations, was and this is going back, it must be 12 years now. It's quite a long time.
Mm.
It was around late 2008, 2009,
Got it.
and it was that they came up with security ambassadors, security mentors,
Yes.
and it was embedding security thought people within the departments. And the best people that they actually chose for that was people who actually, interestingly, was the high risk people in the organization, people who were previously victims as well, that
Right.
because they know the real impact, they know what
Yeah.
it's like to be a victim. So they turned them into security ambassadors, security mentors, and they became embedded security people within the department. And they became those who would communicate out security messages, security notices, security changes, and they became also the go-to within the department when they had. And I will say that the best thing in an organization is that make sure your employee. This is going back to your point about when we victimize the users,
Yeah.
they become
Yep.
afraid to speak and afraid to report
Yeah.
issues.
Totally. That's we
And
got to chill. Yeah.
we need
Yep.
to make sure that when we talk about that, is that our employees need to be empowered. Our employees
Yeah.
should never be afraid to report incidents. So, and I found that always when I did a penetration test in the past, the most challenging organizations was where employees talk so much, they chatter, they communicate, and they will, be very verbal with each other. And it meant that, if you were trying to do something very stealthy, it was
Yeah.
very hard to do that
It's
because employees talk so much that they would be sharing everything. Oh, I got this gift card. They're like, huh,
yeah.
interesting. Like,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden your phishing campaign is done and done
It's just done. Yeah.
so,
Exactly.
but at that point, so that was one of the things, is that you make security ambassadors, security mentors, and also
Yeah.
sure the employees were not afraid to speak out. But the organization, it was interesting when that all this thing happened, and it was just literally after having that interview with the kids. It was bring your kid to work day. Was the
Yeah.
organization realized this interesting, and they said that actually our security perimeter is no longer in our offices anymore. And at that point in time, they realized that actually we need to make sure that our employees' kind of social sphere is also secure as well. And they
Right.
actually went and they actually give all the employees, for all the computers and devices they had at home, and this is 2008, 2009, antivirus software. And they give them, firewalls and everything else, because they realize that actually security starts at the home. It starts at your sphere around
It's
you. And
that one's few and far between this day and age. Even this day and age is still few and far between. Unfortunately, it's getting better because obviously forced function for the last 2 years. But
yeah, and that was,
yeah,
they realized, and they were like, we'll pay the licenses, put it in your home computers, because they realized that security starts at home, and it starts with your family, it starts with your employees, not just in
yeah,
the office, but in the borders. And you fast forward to today, I mean, every employee is working remotely at home these days. So
yeah,
that kind of idea was kind of somewhat kind of way advanced and ahead of its time. But it made me realize that was the point in time as well, is that we're only as secure as the sphere around us. So for
yeah,
me, I had to realize that I have to make sure that I use all that intelligence out there to ask the right questions, to question myself, to use other means. If I see something coming in, I will always go and do additional verification and go back and find another means to communicate where that data source is coming from.
I mean, that applies across the sphere. I mean, that's, back to one of the reasons for doing this podcast is to enable people to ask more questions. So when somebody comes in, when somebody's asking, when somebody's validating, they now have an entire wealth of information to go back to and go, hey, now we know how to choose and quite honestly hold the industry more accountable.
Absolutely. And this is important part is we need to make sure that we help the the community out there understand about how to see through the FUD and fear. And I go back to, I always go to, going back to the power station was that great example, because that we presented FUD and fear. We said, you don't do this,
right,
bad things will happen. But what we should be saying is, if you don't do this, this is what the cost of your business is going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was
And
it was the CFO who said, the cost of doing something versus nothing. And there's, if that gap is big enough, they're willing to invest into, and it might be different things. It might be insurance. It might just documentation. It might be something that just, they'll say, we just want to make sure we're covered from a cost perspective. If that's something that's, in the business operational side, it's a money cost. They might look at how do we cover the insurance of that if there's a value, a specific value. But then if there's a revenue stream that they're depending on, this is where you start kind of looking at.
That's when you start.
Yeah, if this is a technology or a function or a department that's really generating lots of revenue stream, then they're willing to spend more money on securing and reducing that risk in the future. And this is really where, having to be able to understand and relay that. And it's all about mapping. It's all about, understanding how the business works as well. And I think it's really important. I think the role of the BISO these days is a person who's able to translate security into the business speak. And I think that's an important role. I think that the CISO role will evolve much more into a BISO style and really that's what the deal is there, is that they should be not just about technology and the security of information, but they should be all about how they can translate that into business
into the business and the human side of it by far away. Again, it's interesting. We've been chasing technology for so long, and now we've circled back to the human aspect of it again, which is always, it'll be interesting to see where it goes, over the next few years. I'm intrigued to see if we continue, if we have the runway to continue to develop. So it's going to be an interesting one. We'll have to have those conversations on another session by far and away.
Absolutely.
We are running up against time. I want to be respectful of everybody that's listening in on the audience as well, or will be listening in on the audience, I should say. So I want to be respectful of that. Joseph, final thoughts, final comments for the folks that are listening?
I think it's really important that, try to reach out to people and peers and get their insights. Don't try to do this alone. This is really what's important, is find the experts in the industry who can really help you make sure that you're not going down the rabbit holes, or not just going down basically from the fancy brochures. Make sure that you understand about what is those right questions. If you don't have those questions, you're probably not ready for the solution.
Big time.
And the questions really relate to, I will say, is that you want to make sure, and this becomes the issue, and this is something that we've seen too many times in the industry, is that you always make sure that you kind of understand the problem. And if you don't understand the problem, you're not going to get the right solution. You're not going to be able to get the right questions to make sure you're able to minimize or eliminate that problem. I've seen too many times where the solution becomes the problem, and becomes the focus. And all of a sudden, that becomes the priority, is that, it's the technology you're trying to implement, and you forget about what was the original problem that you were trying to solve in the first place. So my recommendation is make sure, one is reach out to experts. There's many out there who can definitely, many who are kind of well seasoned and have done this many times, so don't try to go alone. Do your due diligence, do your research, get the knowledge about what it is you're trying to solve, and get those questions about how you want to make the value and make it actionable. Because ultimately, at the end, the goal is to automate, is to get this to do it in the background that will actually help employees be successful and reduce the risk of the business. So, put security in place because it's making the employees, lives better, making the business more successful. And that's what we're here to do. So at the end, it's not security first. Security is important, but security is there to support the business and the people.
Right. Appreciate it. Thank you very, very, very much. Danny, as always, thank you very much for organizing, sorting it out, and putting this whole blasted thing together, which is a ton of work behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
Joseph, thanks a ton for coming and hanging out. Gratefully appreciated. And hopefully at some point in time, in the not too near distance, if the world actually settles down, we can actually come and hang out face to face.
Absolutely. I'm looking for definitely, RSA, I think, is going to be the place that probably next time I get to the US, as everything goes shit facing, we end up with more challenges.
Free. Here we go. Yeah, exactly.
I'm hoping not, but I'm hoping to be there in person before catching up. Might be across the US before that, but yeah, absolutely. And Danny, I know how hard it is to put all this in the background and schedule time zones and people's schedules. It's a challenge, and thank you for your support and making it all happen.
Cool. Well, thanks to everybody for listening as well. I gratefully appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, night, and we will see everybody on the dark side. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Dr. Dark Web. This show is brought to you by Cyber6Girl, the threat intelligence company. If you would like to learn more, please feel free to follow or subscribe to Dr. Dark Web on your favorite podcast streamer. Or, as an alternative, you can always find us online at cyber6girl.com/podcast. You'll find all the latest episodes, goodies, nuggets of information, background, and probably some stickers or two. See you in the dark.